Welcome to the English Effect. I am so glad you could join us today for this deep dive. And before we jump in, please take a second to like this deep dive, share it, and hit subscribe so you never miss out on these conversations.
Yes, definitely do that. And, today we have a really fascinating topic. We've been talking a lot lately about how people communicate under pressure. And honestly, it's something I notice all the time, especially when the stakes are just impossibly high.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine stepping up to a podium, right? You have to politely disagree with the leaders of the free world. It's live television, millions of people are watching, basically begging for a shouting match.
So it sounds like an absolute nightmare,
Right. Oh, and you happen to be wearing a crown.
which just adds a whole other layer of pressure. I mean, one wrong syllable and you could literally trigger an international incident.
Exactly. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to decode that situation. We are looking at King Charles III's historic address to the U.S. Congress, and we're going to use it as a sort of real-world textbook to learn 10 core English vocabulary words.
And we really want to focus on keeping the English accessible today. So if you're a non-native speaker trying to level up your vocabulary, this is for you. We're looking at how world leaders politely disagree without it turning into total chaos.
Yeah, we are breaking down the language of international relations, but to really appreciate the vocabulary, we need to set the scene first.
We do. The atmosphere in that room was incredibly heavy. So looking at the political context from our sources, the United States and the United Kingdom are experiencing some genuinely strained relations right now.
Right.
There's major friction about the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and, differing political views between U.S. President Donald Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
So, the king's visit to Washington isn't just a fun little vacation. It is a massive diplomatic rescue mission. Which brings us perfectly to our first core word today, which is diplomacy.
Diplomacy.
Yeah, true diplomacy isn't just smiling and waving for the cameras. Diplomacy is basically the art of managing international relations with extreme tact and care.
Right. It's about handling a highly sensitive situation without stepping on anyone's toes. And honestly, if you want to see masterful diplomacy in action, you just have to look at how the king started his speech.
Oh, the joke.
Yes, the joke. He steps up to the microphone, the room is completely divided, and he quotes the Irish writer Oscar Wilde.
I love this part. He says, we have really everything in common with America nowadays, except, of course, language.
It's so smart, because a shared joke is an amazing tool for diplomacy. When you share a laugh, you establish instant rapport.
You soften the room up.
Exactly. You break the ice before you have to pivot to the genuinely heavy subjects.
But, leading up to this moment, a lot of British media outlets were actually super frustrated with all this polite behavior. Like, The Guardian was publishing letters from the public, practically begging the king to drop all protocol.
Right. They wanted him to just point fingers and criticize people directly.
Which introduces our second word, protocol. Protocol refers to the official procedure, or the strict rules governing state affairs.
Right. And to the general public, protocol often just looks like, stuffy, outdated manners.
Yeah, like knowing which fancy fork to use at a state dinner. But that completely misses the point of protocol.
It really does.
I think of protocol kind of like the rules of a boxing match. Having a rule like no hitting below the belt, well, that's the only thing that keeps a professional, athletic competition from turning into a chaotic street brawl.
That is such a brilliant analogy. True diplomats rarely abandon protocol because that structure is what provides a safe framework to have a really difficult conversation.
If you drop protocol, you lose the safety net.
Exactly. You aren't having a debate anymore, you're just fighting.
Okay, so we've got our gloves on, we know the rules of the match. But before you can safely disagree with someone, you have to establish what you actually share. You have to prove the relationship is enduring.
Which is our third word.
Yes, enduring. Which means something that is continuing or really long-lasting.
And the king praised the enduring ties between the UK and the US early in his speech. And the history of those enduring ties is fascinating. Winston Churchill actually coined the term the English-speaking peoples.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to describe this deep connection. But what's wild from the sources is that out of the 10 British monarchs since 1776, only 3 have actually visited the U.S. in person.
Wait, really? Only 3 in 2.5 centuries?
Yeah, George VI, Queen Elizabeth II, and now Charles III.
That is mind-blowing.
It really is. And because it's so rare, it carries so much weight when they talk about that enduring history.
Speaking of that shared history, there is this anecdote in the sources that I just have to share. It's about Winston Churchill during World War II. So it's the Blitz, bombs are dropping on London, and Churchill is in this tiny underground bunker.
The cabinet war rooms.
Right, and he had this door marked as his private washroom.
Oh, right, the disconnected toilet.
Yes. It looked like a bathroom, but the plumbing didn't work. It was completely fake. It actually hid a direct, super secret phone line to the U.S. president.
That is amazing.
Yeah. He'd lock himself in there to have these highly classified conversations. And that level of trust brings us to our fourth word, alignment.
Alignment. Okay, so that means a position of agreement or alliance, right?
Exactly. The king was reminding everyone of that history to find alignment. You have to show you're in alignment on the foundation before you start talking about disagreements.
And he proved that alignment by going way back to the Magna Carta.
Oh, yeah, the 800-year-old document.
Right. For our listeners who might not know, it's the document that helped establish checks and balances on executive power. It basically said, even the king has to follow the rules.
And the sources note that when he mentioned checks and balances, he got a massive standing ovation.
He did. It started with the Democrats, who, to remain completely neutral here, often critique President Trump's use of executive power, but then the applause just spread across the whole room.
It's a masterful way to find alignment, but eventually you can't just talk about history. You have to address the current issues. You have to face the contention.
Which is our fifth word. Contention.
Yeah, contention simply means heated disagreement. You can have a deeply enduring relationship and still have major points of contention.
And the king bravely acknowledged that contention, specifically the Middle East and the war in Europe. But he did it using what might be the absolute pinnacle of polite disagreement.
Oh, the 1776 line.
Yes, he said, with the spirit of 1776 in our minds, we could perhaps agree that we do not always agree.
Okay, I have to push back here because when I read that, I thought, isn't that a massive risk?
How so?
I mean, 1776 is the year America violently rebelled against his own family. They fought a war to get away from the British monarchy. Bringing that up seems like a terrible idea for a British king.
It does sound risky, but it was actually a stroke of genius. By bringing up 1776, the king validated America's right to disagree with them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it transitions the relationship. It's like he's saying, you fought a war so you wouldn't have to agree with me. I respect that. It stops them from feeling like enemies and frames them as facing a common adversary.
Adversary. That is our sixth word. And this is a really important distinction for English learners. What is the difference between an enemy and an adversary?
It's a huge difference. An enemy is highly emotional, right? It's hostile. You want to destroy an enemy.
Yeah, it feels personal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But an adversary is a professional opponent. It's diplomatic. You can play chess with an adversary. You respect them, even if you are in conflict.
And the king used the word adversary when discussing NATO. He kept the language so neutral, but, why is his language so carefully neutral? Why not use stronger words?
Well, this comes down to the British Constitution. Unlike the U.S. president, who is both the head of state and the head of government.
Right, the president passes laws and represents the country.
Exactly. In the UK, those roles are separate. The prime minister is the head of government doing the messy politics. The king is the head of state. So he must remain constitutionally neutral.
Ah, so he can't pick sides.
Never. His ultimate goal is always reconciliation.
Which is word number 7. Reconciliation is the act of restoring friendly relations. It's about repairing the bridge so everyone can work together the next day.
And achieving that reconciliation takes so much work behind the scenes.
Seriously. The drafting process for this speech was intense. The sources say the king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, was constantly liaising with number 10 Downing Street.
The prime minister's office.
Right. And the Foreign Office. And the king personally refined the drafts with a red pen. They had to balance everything perfectly.
Because the fear back home was massive. Critics in the media were terrified the trip would just be an exercise in appeasement.
Appeasement, that's word number 8. Appeasement means pacifying someone just by giving in to their demands.
Right, just to avoid conflict. It has a very weak connotation in history.
Nobody wants their leader to practice appeasement, and they were also terrified the king would be obsequious.
Obsequious. Word number 9. I love this word.
It's a great word. It means being excessively obedient or servile, like fawning over someone in power, almost like a servant.
Yeah, the British public was desperate for the king not to be obsequious toward U.S. leaders.
And according to historians, he completely avoided being obsequious. It wasn't appeasement at all. Instead, he offered subtle rebuttals.
Which is our final core word, number 10, rebuttal.
Yes, a rebuttal is a contradiction or pushing back against an argument. But what's key here is that a rebuttal doesn't have to be loud or angry.
No, it can be delivered with absolute grace. For example, he heavily praised the Royal Navy and environmental protections.
Which are topics the U.S. president has openly downplayed in the past.
Exactly. The king didn't attack him. He just delivered a firm, polite rebuttal by stating his own unwavering support for those things.
It's a masterclass in holding your ground. And he paired that polite rebuttal with the ultimate diplomatic gift.
Oh, the bell.
Yes, do you remember what he gave President Trump?
I do. It's brilliant. Go ahead and tell everyone.
He gave him a bell from a 1944 British submarine, and the submarine was named the HMS Trump.
You literally cannot write better diplomacy than that.
It's perfect. It honors military history, and it has the president's name right on it. And President Trump loved it. He called the speech fantastic.
It proves you can deliver rebuttals, avoid being obsequious, and still achieve total reconciliation.
All right, so let's quickly recap our 10 words for our listeners. We started with the art of diplomacy and following strict protocol.
Then we looked at building an enduring relationship and finding alignment.
We talked about managing contention by treating the other side as an adversary, not an enemy, to reach reconciliation.
And finally, we saw how to avoid appeasement and an obsequious tone by delivering a polite rebuttal.
You know, what's really cool is that you don't have to be a king to use this toolkit. You can use these exact strategies and these words in your everyday life.
Absolutely. In a tricky meeting or navigating a delicate disagreement with a friend, finding alignment before tackling contention works everywhere.
It really does.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We live in an age where social media encourages us to be as loud and hostile as possible, right?
Oh, completely.
Where enemies are made in a matter of seconds online. So what would happen if we stepped back and started treating our own daily disagreements with the careful, structured protocol of international diplomacy?
It would change everything. Just aiming for reconciliation instead of trying to win a shouting match. So we want you to practice using these 10 advanced terms in your next English conversation. Test out your own diplomacy.
Yes, definitely try them out.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please like the video, share it with a fellow English learner, and subscribe to The English Effect for more explorations into the nuances of language.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.